John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles Insider. Also covers the league nationally at FanRag Sports NFL, at JF McMullen on Twitter. It's brought to you by BMW of Atlantic City. The ultimate driving experience is closer than you think, just off exit 37 on the Garden State Parkway, or online at bmwofAtlanticCity.com. And Johnny Mack is in the house as the Eagles at OTAs, a wet and rainy OTA up there, but the Eagles went outside. They didn't care about the weather today there, John, as they probably relish in the fact to watch you guys get wet.
Yeah, we got yelled at. I was just telling Josh, we got yelled at by the head coach. So I was yelled at by greatness today, as I like to call it.
You were yelled at because you were getting wet, or you were yelled at because you were going for cover?
We were going for cover. There's this little overhang at the NovaCare complex, and a bunch of us went for it when it started pouring, and the head coach had a problem with it. So I find that a little bit amusing. I think he should have had his eyes focused on the field, but they were focused on us.
Okay, well, a lot of stuff to focus on the field today, one of which you wrote about at 97.3 ESPN.com. There was a big man in the middle of the defense back.
Yeah, Cox was back as expected. He had Snapchatted that he was back in Philadelphia, so he was going to be there and show up, and he did as expected, and he spoke after practice, and he said he had a family engagement that had been scheduled for a while, and that he's back for good. He'll be at the rest of the OTAs, and I think it'll move on pretty quickly from here, and probably, because it's the off season, and he just came off signing a guaranteed contract for $63 million. It raised more eyebrows than it should have, the fact that he wasn't here last week, and he probably should have been. I can only speculate, but my guess is that this family event or whatever it was probably scheduled before the dates came out for the OTAs, and he didn't want to miss it. And unfortunately, he missed 1 week, but he was back today.
Okay, John, a couple other news and notes before we get into today. The Eagles restructured Rodney McLeod's contract. $3.2 million of his salary was converted to a bonus, which opened up a little bit of room. $2.4 million in cap space for the Eagles. So Howie over the weekend doing a little bit of due diligence.
Yeah, and that's what Howie's sort of famous for, is redoing deals and getting a little bit of space, because the Eagles are seemingly always up against it from a salary cap standpoint. They still have to sign Derek Barnett. He has not signed his contract to this point yet, and they're obviously always looking to improve in other areas, so you never know when another roster move is coming down the pike. But this is another situation of Howie redoing deals to get a little money in the short term.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen. Jim Schwartz speaks today, and obviously as the defensive coordinator, their side of the ball has a lot of question marks still. And the first question came out firing. Hey, Jim, did you guys do enough to address the cornerback position this year? I would have liked to have seen the video if he was squirming or not on that one.
Yeah, I mean, Jim's pretty honest. So the fact that he was hemming and hawing tells you that he's like the rest of us. The answer to that is he doesn't know. And I don't think any of us know whether the Eagles are going to be good enough at the cornerback position. If you go back to last year, for instance, at this time, Jim Schwartz had no real issue of saying that Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod were going to be a really, really good safety tandem, because that's what he thought. And it turned out to be true, because they're two good players. There's a lot of unknowns at the cornerback position. And you're talking about a rookie in Rasul Douglas, who was tremendous today, probably the star of the practice. Second-year player Jalen Mills, still feeling his way, still learning. And then the veteran you have in the mix, Patrick Robinson, is a guy coming off an injury-plagued season, and he's had a number of those issues in the past. So if you're going to use one word to describe the cornerback situation in Philadelphia, it's probably uncertainty. And Jim Schwartz is just as uncertain as the rest of us.
You just mentioned Rasul Douglas, tremendous today, probably the star of the practice. What did he do? What was the standout?
Well, he got his hands on the football a lot. 3 times that I saw, and a couple other guys were saying there was a fourth, which I could have missed. But we've talked about his ball skills in the past. That was the scouting report. That was the talk about him. He just has this innate ability to go get the ball when it's in the air, and you really saw it today. There was another instance where he kind of lost in a 50-50 ball with Alshon Jeffrey, and that was interesting to watch because you had the big, lengthy receiver going against the big, lengthy quarterback, and Jeffrey won that one. But he was there, and he was in a position to possibly make a play. And there's 3 other pass breakups at least in the practice. You could see why they liked the kid. You could see his length that we talked about. And as I said, he's just got an ability to go find the football when it's in the air.
John McMullen with us, our Eagles insider. Jim Schwartz talks today about the cornerback position, John. Did Schwartz seem okay with the fact that they took a guy who might not play in the second round?
Yeah, because I think he sees what the rest of us see, and that's a really, really talented kid. And he mentioned that's some of the decisions you have to make as an organization. And you have to sort of weigh each side, the short term and the long term. And I think, I kind of compare it to time-release medication. That's what Sidney Jones projects to be. It's not going to help you right away, but he's really, really talented. And if he's healthy, this is a guy who would have been a top 15 pick in the draft. So that's going to add a level of just pure athleticism and pure talent that we haven't seen for a while at the cornerback position in Philadelphia.
How about Mills? Because I know Schwartz was asked about Mills and whether or not he might make a big leap forward.
Yeah, I mean, he has to. The question is, will he? Because, again, if you look at where this team is right now, the starting cornerbacks are Jalen Mills and Patrick Robinson. And then as they go to the nickel, it would be Jalen Mills going inside to the slot, Rasul Douglas coming in for him on the outside. So that's that's a lot on his plate. The fact that he's expected to start outside and then move inside on obvious passing situations. And the one thing Jim said is he applauds his work ethic. He applauds his competitiveness. And that's a big part of this, because generally the players in this league that turn into stars are the guys who just work harder than everybody else, because everybody at this level has athleticism, especially at that particular position, cornerback. And sometimes it is the ability to work, and that's something Jim harps on when he talks about Jalen Mills. But I hearken back to what I said at the beginning of this call, and the fact that there's just a ton of uncertainty with this position in the Eagles.
Uncertainty, and yet Schwartz seems to kind of feel like maybe they can be better this year. What are some of the reasons that Jim Schwartz thinks that this group of corners might be better than last year?
Well, I think athletically they got a little bit better than they were last year. You think about Nolan Carroll. You think about Leotis McKelvin, who's a tremendous athlete but was hampered by hamstring injuries basically for the whole season. So, and then you see what they move forward. Patrick Robinson, for instance, is a former first-round pick. So he's very athletic if he's able to stay on the field. I mentioned just the length, the size, the ball skills of Rasul Douglas. So I think from a ceiling standpoint, and then, we always talk about improvement. I say, and you always look at free agents, and that would be Robinson. You always look at the draft picks, and that would be Douglas and later Sidney Jones. But the one thing everyone ignores is the improvement from within, and that's where Mills comes in, and the fact that guys improve, and they have to improve. And generally, you see the biggest leap from year one to year two, so they expect a lot more from Jalen this season. So on paper, they could be better, but could and will is different.
Did you get a sense that Schwartz has a say in who they picked? Like, does he have input on, hey, yeah, I like this Douglas kid, go in that direction, he fits what I want to do?
Well, I mean, position coaches have a say. They're not in the mechanics of sort of the draft board. That's for Joe Douglas and his crew. But if you're good at the personnel side of the job, you're drafting players that the coaches like. So you want their input. They tend to come in late in the process, and they're at the Senior Bowl, as Jim mentioned today, and you sort of delve into it and say, what do you need to run your defense? That's what Joe Douglas is asking Jim Schwartz, and Jim gives him feedback. So from that circumstance, they're certainly involved, but no, they're not in the war room fighting for guys. That's not the job of coordinators and assistant coaches.
So, Jim, in addition to the cornerback position, the pass rush and the D-line discussed a lot today, specifically Derek Barnett. Where does Schwartz see Barnett fitting in, and what kind of a role does he see for him?
His name's John.
What did I say?
Jim.
Oh, sorry. You know who you are.
Well, I do know who I am. And they're very high on Derek Barnett up and down this organization. And a lot of it has to do with just what I said about Jalen Mills, is the fact that they love his work ethic. And if you look at every defensive lineman in the history of this game, and you go to the Hall of Famers especially, and they all have different physical attributes, but they have one thing in common, and that one thing is the motor and the fact that they never stop. And that's what they love about Derek Barnett. He's got that motor. He's got that ability to just keep going after it, play after play after play. And then he's got a natural bend around the edge that they always talk about, and his ability, Jim mentioned, to get low to the ground as he's going around the edge is very, very rare. So we'll see how long. As I said, it's not as important to have him out there 70-80% of the time as it is Rasul Douglas, who's a third-round pick, simply because there's not as big a need, and they have some depth at defensive end. Vinny Curry wasn't there today, but Chris Long was with the first team. And you have Vinny, who's still going to be here, and obviously Brandon Graham. So they have a lot of talent at defensive end, and they're going to go slow with Derek Barnett, but they expect him to play a lot.
Yeah, and he was asked about his thoughts on the pass rush last year, and I guess that's a question that kind of sets up the hope that adding Long and having a Derek Barnett, the first-round pick, and Curry, who was not there today, as you mentioned, to see where he sees this pass rush, kind of helping out maybe that secondary.
Yeah, they go hand in hand, the pass rush and coverage. So you would love to have, when the pass rush doesn't get there, you want the corners to sort of hold their coverage a little bit longer, and vice versa. If the corners are struggling, you want the pass rush to get there. Too often, let's be honest, the pass rush created hurries, but they weren't able to finish. And Jim mentioned that specifically regarding Brandon Graham and Vinny Curry. They were in position to get the quarterback, but they missed too often. And somehow they got to figure out how to improve that. And, Jim called the defensive line, the pass rush, the engine of his defense. It always has been, whether it's in Tennessee, Detroit, Buffalo, here, that's just the way he runs his defense. So it's the most important part of it. And if you're being honest with yourself, they have more pressure on them because the corners are just not nearly as good as the defensive line projects to be.
Now, what did Schwartz have to say about Curry's issues last year? Because he was a guy who got paid a lot of money, and many people thought, man, going back to the 4-3, now there were some reports that he was playing with an MCL, sprain or tear or whatever. But I think Vinny Curry, specifically for myself, I was really disappointed in the year that he brought. I thought that he was going to really have a breakout type of year going from that 3-4, where he was a good pass rusher out of position, to this 4-3 back to his natural spot. He was highly disappointing for me. What did Schwartz have to say about Curry's issues from last year?
Well, yeah, he mentioned the fact he thought the knee injury certainly hampered him a bit, but he wasn't leaning on that excuse completely. He thinks he was in a position. He did rush the passer relatively well, but he wasn't able to finish, and he wasn't able to get the quarterback down when he was in position to do so. And I think everybody, from Howie Roseman, who signed him to that extension, obviously to Jim Schwartz, I think everybody expected Vinny to have a big year as a pass rusher in his defense, and it just didn't materialize. He's going to have another opportunity. He's one of the starting defensive ends right now, opposite Brandon Graham. And we'll see. To me, the biggest issue with Vinny Curry, though, is not the pass rush. Whether it's a hurry or a sack, he's going to do some good things. My problem with Vinny Curry is he's never been very good in run defense, and you get exposed in that aspect of the game when he's on the field. So can you afford to have him out there 70, 80% of the time? I'm not so sure about that.
John, anything on the offensive side of the ball stand out when Doug wasn't yelling at you? Maybe the wideouts or the running back spot?
It was a sloppy day, and obviously the weather. The quarterbacks were not good today, and I think a lot of it had to do with the weather. And it was just one of those days. So from an offensive standpoint, I think the one guy, and everybody's going to chuckle, but the one guy who has stood out and been consistently good has been Nelson Aguilar. He's really it's May. It doesn't matter. There's no pressure on him. He's not expected to do things to be a big part of this offense, but he looks like the most improved player on the field. While I say that, you can see a huge difference between the receiving group, and Jordan Matthews wasn't there today because he's dealing with knee tendonitis, but you can just see the savvy of Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith, and it's just, light years above what they were throwing out there last season. So wide receiver looks like a much improved position for this team.
Torrey Smith's an interesting guy. I feel like a lot of people are kind of suggested that he's done, that the 2 years in San Francisco was all they needed to see to say, hey, this guy, he's a one-trick pony. He can't play anymore. Is that what you see from him?
No, he's been very good early on. And as I said, I think he's a little bit better of a route runner than people give him credit for, because I think you're right. They regard him as a deep threat and not much else. To be honest, he was really bad on film last year in San Francisco. I think he knows that. He understands that. Part of it is, I think, human nature. That was such a bad football team. You hate to say people gave up, but I think people did give up. And it wasn't just Torrey Smith. There was a lot of people on that team that had been good players previously, and that's the kind of year they went through. Franchise record, 13 consecutive losses. That will quickly kill your love of the game, so to speak, and I think that's part of what happened to Torrey Smith. I don't think he's a star by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think he's a big improvement to what has been here.
And with that, I guess Dorial Green-Beckham's chances each and every day. I know we're only in May, heading into June, but a lot of people suggesting that he's going to be the odd man out. Is there anything that suggests that he's going to make this an interesting competition?
Well, I think he's up against it from a number standpoint. But as we say, things change quickly in the NFL. Things are very fluid, especially at that position where you can have injury issues crop up. They could be hamstrings. They could be far more serious issues. But, yeah, I mean, if everybody stays healthy, he's going to have a very difficult time making this roster. There's no question about it. And he's doesn't have much of a chance. If everything goes according to plan and everybody is what the Eagles expect, you understand they want to keep Mac Hollins and Shelton Gibson because they're rookies with upside. So those are two roster spots. And then obviously he's behind Alshon Jeffrey, Torrey Smith, Jordan Matthews, and Nelson Aguilar. So you're not going to keep 7 receivers. And that's just the reality of the situation. So barring injuries, yeah, DGB is probably not going to be here, but he also understands he has to play well to get a job elsewhere in this league. So he's going to compete.
All right, John, plenty more this week. OTAs continue, and we'll have it for you every day at this time on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. For John's Eagles coverage from OTAs 24/7, go to 97.3ESPN.com and give him a follow on Twitter at JF McMullen for all his national coverage from FanRag Sports NFL, where he's got a lot of really good off-season pieces up right now that you guys can kind of sink your teeth into that, unfortunately, with a lot of live Eagles stuff happening, we didn't get a chance to really get into. But check out John's takes on the NFL as a whole, and you can get that at JF McMullen. All right, pal, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Yeah, and real quick, Jim was yelled at by Coach Peterson, not me.
Oh, that's right. We got to get that right. And your name is John, too, right? Just so I clarify.
Thanks, guys.